Hey, I want to ask you to get out your circulatory system notes out that should have already been taken at this point, and I would like to just go through and just discuss these notes with you as you follow along. And again, these should already have been taken at this point. So your circulatory system is one of the major systems in your body. It's the one that kind of links all of your other systems together. You'll hear it also named as the cardiovascular system. That's referring to the same system. And the essential components of this system are your heart, your blood vessels, and your blood. So we're going to be learning a lot about your heart, a lot of details about the structure of your heart. We're going to be learning about the parts of your heart and how blood flows through the heart. The functions or the job of the circulatory system is to carry needed substances to your cells. Your cells constantly need an influx of glucose, potassium, sodium, all sorts of vitamins and minerals. And in return, your cell is giving your blood things that it doesn't need, like a buildup of carbon dioxide. So this is all transported through your blood. It also removes waste products, like I just mentioned, which would be primarily cellular waste like carbon dioxide. And it helps to fight disease. Why does it help to fight disease? Because the blood is what transports your white blood cells, which we talked about just a couple weeks ago. The heart itself is a hollow muscular organ whose job is to pump blood throughout your entire body. It lies behind the sternum, inside the rib cage, and is located in the center of your chest. So your sternum is in the center of your chest. So if everyone would just kind of make a fist with their left hand, this is approximately the size of your heart, because the size of your heart is going to grow with the size of your body. So think of like a little tiny baby fist, and the taller and bigger you are, the bigger your heart would be. You're going to take that fist and you're going to put it at the center of your chest and just go slightly to the left. Okay. So your heart is more to the center than it is to the left. You have some people that do like the Pledge of Allegiance and put their hand way over here, and your heart is not there. Your heart's in the center, slightly to the left. And so it's about that size. Okay, so I have my little diagram of my heart here, and some of you have a diagram of the heart at your desk as well. And so if you don't have one, we'll be sharing those, but mine is a little bit larger just to show the different parts of the heart. And we're going to be talking through and learning about these things. All right, so the structure of the heart, so it has a left and a right side. So you have a left side of the heart and a right side of the heart, and it's separated by a wall of tissue called the septum. Each side has two chambers. You have what's called the upper chambers. Okay, chambers are kind of like fancy for room, and then you have your lower chambers. The upper chambers have a name. They're called the atria, okay, or atrium for singular, atria for plural. And then the bottom parts are called the ventricles. And so you've got a ventricle on either side. And each of the atria and the ventricles on each side are separated by a valve. Now in my model right here, the valve is this, it kind of looks like a net, okay, like a white net. And that's signifying a valve. And the atria and the ventricles are separated by that. And what a valve does, it has a very important role, that it prevents the backflow of blood. You want blood to be going in the one direction. You don't want it to go backwards. So this is kind of a basic diagram. And you have a handout in your notes that we will be filling out here shortly of the different parts of the heart. There's about 13 or 14 structures that I'm going to ask you to know and to memorize. And so I want you to notice a couple of things, however, is that all the major blood vessels of the heart are located what's called the superior end, or the top end. You have most of your major blood vessels that stem from the heart going to be at the superior end of the heart versus the inferior, or the bottom half of the heart. So how the heart works in general is that when we talk about like a heartbeat, I'm sure you've heard, maybe even your own heartbeat through like a stethoscope, or if you heard it on a video. But there's two main phases of the heartbeat. There's called the relaxation and the contraction phase. So in one phase, the heart just completely relaxes. And when it relaxes, it fills up with blood. And I'm going to show you a video of this as well. And then the other phase, the heart contracts. When you think contract, you think squeeze. It squeezes together. And when it squeezes together, it's pushing out the blood. And when it relaxes, it's filling up with blood. And so you have a relaxation and a contraction phase. So when the heart relaxes, blood is going to come in and fill these chambers. And blood will always fill the atria first, and then the atria will contract and push blood down to the ventricles. And then the ventricles contract and they actually push blood out of the heart. Okay, they push blood out of the heart. So we're going to talk about this in a second, but there's two places that blood will go when it leaves the heart. One place that it will go is the lungs, or it goes to the aorta, to the rest of your body. And we'll talk about that. So when the ventricles contract, so when these two ventricles contract, they're exerting, this is a physical concept called a force, so actually like pushing the blood. And what's interesting is this left ventricle right here exerts more of a force than the right ventricle. And the reason why it does that is because of where it has to push the blood. So your left ventricle, and y'all, when you're looking at the screen, it looks right to you. This is an important point for me to note right now. When we're talking about the sides of the heart, and when we go to label the sides of the heart, on paper, it's going to be opposite of how it is like in your body. So I want you to imagine like this heart is like in my body. And if this heart is in my body, this is my right side and this is my left side. Now to you, it looks opposite. So you have to, when we go to label the heart, one of the first things I tell students to do is write down the right and the left side first so that you don't get confused because it's opposite of how you see it. So this left ventricle is actually having to push blood. The right ventricle just has to push blood to the lungs. So it doesn't have to go very far. The left ventricle has to exert a force strong enough to get blood all the way up to your head, all the way down to your toes with enough force to get it back to your heart. So it actually has to push with a little bit of a stronger force. Thus, think about lifting weights. If someone uses their muscles more, then the muscles get bigger. So the left ventricle actually right here is quite bigger than the right ventricle because of the force it has to exert. Your heartbeat is actually regulated by a group of cells called the pacemaker. Now, you may have heard the pacemaker before, like, oh, my grandma had to go get a pacemaker. Actually, everybody has one. And sometimes as you get older, it may not work properly and they have to replace it. But the pacemaker is actually just a group of cells, and its job is to regulate your heartbeat. And the way that it regulates your heartbeat is it receives messages from your brain. So your brain, honestly, that's going to be one of the next organs we talk about, is in charge of everything. And it is going to tell the heart how quickly it needs to pump. So sometimes our heart rates will change through the day. Sometimes our heart rates go up or go down due to movement, exercise, nervousness. All of those things can change your heart rate. And your brain is trying to match your heart rate to meet the oxygen demands of your cells. Okay, so there's a two-loop system of how blood leaves the heart, and this is probably the most confusing part of this unit, and we're going to really, really practice it. And you just need to make sure that you are engaged and listening and participating as we go through and practice this pathway of blood, because the more you practice, the more you hear it, the better you're going to be at it, and you'll see what I mean here in just a second. So blood is going to leave the heart and travel through arteries. So blood vessels are split up into arteries, capillaries, and veins. So arteries will always carry blood away from the heart. The way you know it's an artery is that blood has left the heart. A vein always carries blood back to the heart, and capillaries are like the in-between. They're like the teeny tiny little blood vessels. And there are two pumps. There's a right side and a left side, because the blood on the right and the left side of the heart do not mix, and you don't want them to mix. You'll see why. So we're going to talk about loop 1. This loop is to the lungs and back. Okay, so I'm abbreviating in our notes here. So RA stands for right atrium, RV is right ventricle. And we're going to practice this in a little bit. So blood from your body is going to always travel back to the right atrium, which is right up here. And at that point, it is deprived of oxygen. So the blood has gone to all the parts of your body and it has released all the oxygen needed for your cells. Now it's coming back to your heart because it needs oxygen. So it goes into the right atrium and then pushes it into the right ventricle and then out the right ventricle into the arteries that lead to your lungs, okay, the major arteries. And in the lungs, a really important process called gas exchange happens, where you are exchanging the buildup of carbon dioxide for the oxygen. And then from that point, after it goes to the lungs, it's going to come back to the heart and go in to this left side and will be pumped through the second loop. So loop 2 is to the body and back. So your left atrium fills with blood. It goes to your left ventricle, and then it goes out the aorta. Now the aorta is the largest. This is what's known as the aortic arch. This is the largest artery in the body. And so blood will leave the left ventricle and go through the aorta. And then from there, it branches off. There's some that will go up to your upper half of the body. Others will go to the lower part of the body. And at this point, oxygen is moving out of your blood into your cells, and it's transferring the carbon dioxide from your cells back into your blood. And the cycle continues at that point. Then the blood comes all the way back to the right side again. Okay, so this is called a two-loop system, And at this point, I want us to stop here. And what we're going to do now is we are going to fill out, if you go in your packet here, we are going to fill out the diagram of the parts of the heart, okay, that you need to know. So everybody open to page 6 here where it has the parts of the heart, okay, and we are going to copy those down. So let me pull that up here. Not that, there we go. Okay, so the diagram of the heart here. So we're going to start with 0 and make our way down. And you are going to be filling these out as I go through. And I'm going to try to do some highlighting here. Let's see. Okay. Actually I'm talking to myself, marker. Okay. So 0 is going to be the pulmonary artery. Okay. So this is called the pulmonary artery. Sorry, guys. I'm actually going to need to find where I can actually stop my screencast just for a moment. Save that. What is that? Okay, so O is pointing to the pulmonary artery. And I want to just kind of note that anytime you see the word pulmonary, that is referring to the lungs. Okay, so that's going to have something to do with the lungs, whether it is going to the lungs or coming from the lungs. So pulmonary artery. So I'm going to kind of draw that you can kind of see that is this structure right here, pulmonary artery. And pulmonary meaning lungs, artery meaning going away from the heart. Okay. All right. Number 1 is going to be superior vena cava. Okay. Superior vena cava. That is this structure right here. Superior meaning above, and then vena cava. Some people say vena cava. You can do either one of those. Okay, then you have pulmonary vein. So again, you have the word pulmonary. So what does that mean? It means something to do with the lungs. Vein means that it is returning back to the heart. It's going to the heart. So these two structures are called the pulmonary veins. Then you have 3 is right atrium. So the right atrium is right here. Okay. 4 is pulmonary, again, dealing with the lungs, valve. So this is one of those valves. And so the pulmonary valve, I know it's hard to see, so I'm kind of pointing to it, is this structure right here. Then you have what's called the tricuspid valve, and that's the valve right here that separates the right and the left atrium, the right atrium from the right ventricle. Remember that this is the right side of the heart. It's opposite of how you see. So we want to make sure that 8 is labeled right side. Then this is the right ventricle. okay? The right ventricle even extends into this area. It's rather large. And then this structure right here is the inferior vena cava. So that is the right side of the heart. Now the left side of the heart, make sure number 17 is marked as left. All right, at number 9, you have the largest artery in the body that is kind of trademarked by this aortic arch here. So this is called the aorta. 10, you have pulmonary arteries again. So this is the same thing you just labeled. It's just on the other side of the heart. And 11 are pulmonary veins again. This is the pulmonary veins that go back to the left side of the heart. These were the pulmonary veins that go back to the right. 12 is the left atrium. The valve that separates it here is called the mitral valve. This is really hard to see, but it's right here. This is called the aortic valve. Then you have the left ventricle. Then you have the wall of tissue that separates them both, thinner in some areas than others. That is called the septum. So these are the parts of the heart that you will need to know. Those are the parts of the heart that you will need to know. Okay, now we are going to go and practice. We're going to practice the pathway of blood flow, and this is where everyone will have a chance to come to my board and do what I'm doing. I'm going to model it for you right now, and you can have your pathway out. So for the first time, if you have red and blue pens or red and blue crayon or markers or anything, I would encourage you to have color. If you don't, just do letter R's for red and letter B's for blue. I'm going to model it for you one time, and then I'm just going to ask students to come up here to the board and practice it. And as we start, the first few students to do this probably are going to need their notes and help. But as we kind of get better at it and used to it, we may get to the point where students won't need notes, and that is my goal for you. So I promise that I know that you're feeling, oh my gosh, how am I going to know all these parts of the heart in the pathway of blood flow? I promise that you will. If you pay attention and you do what I ask you to do, this is going to become like second nature. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera around so that I can do this on the board you can see here. Okay, and I'm going to model this and walk through how you would do this. Okay, so I'm going to start with red because red indicates O2 poor blood, and blue is going to indicate O2 rich blood. Okay, so blood has been traveling throughout the body and needs to get some more oxygen. So it is going to be traveling through the vena cava. Oh, guys, no. It's going to be traveling through the vena cava. It's low in oxygen, and it's going to come back to the right side of the heart. So all blood is going to go into the right atrium, and the right atrium is going to contract. The blood's going to be pushed through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. The right ventricle contracts, and it pushes blood out of what's called the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary valve is going to send this blood to the right and left lungs because we have two lungs. In the blood, in the lungs, you have this very important gas exchange that happens. And the blood is now no longer oxygen poor, it is now oxygen rich. So the blood is now going to travel through the pulmonary veins going back to the heart. It's going to enter the left atrium, and then the left atrium will contract, push it through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. The left ventricle will contract and the blood will go out what's called the aortic valve and then enter the aorta. And from the aorta, blood is going to go to all sorts of parts of the body, giving oxygen and needed materials, and then eventually will come back and circulate and go back to the right side of the heart. Okay, so that wasn't so bad. Everyone's going to have a chance to do that, and I've modeled that for you. You have that sheet of paper in your packet as well. So now I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to ask for my first brave volunteer to see if you would like to come and model this for us. And again, you can have your resources out in front of you if you need to. all of that is fine. I just ask that those of us in the audience are listening and attentive and looking at their own notes, because that is going to help you with learning it yourself.